Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your patience. Seems like the system is working today, so that's always a good sign. Thank everybody for coming out. Shall we get started? First of all, my name is Eric Malice. I am the Chief Product Officer as well as the co-founder here at National Test Systems. I have coming up on 21 years experience in the business now. And ever since we started, my brother and I started the company, he was always good with the business stuff. He was good at marketing and sales and inventory and billing and all the other, boring stuff. But what that did for me was it gave me to focus on the part that I found very interesting, the part that I know I needed to learn more about, and that is all about drug testing, all about how the drugs work, how the tests work, how the drugs interact with the human body. Really all things clinical toxicology, but especially as it relates to what we do, which is drug testing. So today we have another in our ongoing series of educational webinars. So National Test Systems, if you've dealt with us in any form or fashion for any time at all, you know how big we are on education. Education is it's in our DNA. It's what we strive to be more than anything is an educational platform. Now, anyone could, send you cups. Anyone could, provide you with the billing in a timely fashion and all that fun stuff. But really, we hope to stand out and make ourselves unique because we do like to provide so much education, so much training, and just so much good information that you guys can use, hoping to make your daily drug testing duties a little bit easier or at least a little bit more insightful. And I see a good amount of you here today, so that's good. That tells me that we're not the only ones who think education is important. So let's, one last thing. If you see on the upper left, we've got a questions little button on the left-hand pane. If you do have any questions, please post them there. There's also a chat if you want to chat among yourself or, the sound's not working or something else like that, that's fine. So we got about 15-minute presentation here today, after which we'll get to any questions you've posted in the questions section. If for some reason we can't get to all the questions today, just know that your consultant will be reaching out in the coming days. And at that time, they'll get to any questions I might have missed. And at that time, they're also going to give you an opportunity to make suggestions for future webinar topics. They'll give you an opportunity to request a training directly with me and you and your staff, either on this subject or on another subject that you might find is helpful to you. So what are we talking about today? Today, are we discussing cocaine, which is a stimulant? You may remember my last webinar. If you guys were here, we talked about amphetamine, which is also a stimulant. But just to retouch, in case anyone is unaware, stimulants include things we think of as innocuous as caffeine. Almost everybody has some form of stimulant in their daily life. Cigarette nicotine is a stimulant. So there's a lot of common stimulants. It also goes to the extreme other end with things like cocaine, which we're going to talk about today, and things like bath salts. So what I chose to do for cocaine, and not everyone's going to love what I did here, but there's a lot to cover in cocaine. I try and couple that with appreciating your time. I don't want to do a 2-hour webinar, force all of you to sit through a 2-hour webinar. However, if you wanted to deeper dive into any of these sections that we're going to talk about today, by all means, talk to your consultant and let's schedule it. So what I ended up doing today is more of a jack of all trades, master of none. So we're going to talk about a lot of different things. We're just not going to get as much of a deep dive as I imagine some of you would have preferred. And again, we can definitely offer that to you. And I'll happily do that with you. I just felt for purposes of this format, we were better off trying to catch a little bit of everything instead of getting too bogged down with the minutia. So before we go too far, a little more on stimulants. So as I said, stimulants are an extremely wide range of substances, to things we think of as innocuous as caffeine, to things as serious as bath salts, as dangerous as bath salts. Now, in general, stimulants have a wide variety of therapeutic uses. We've got medicines for ADHD, we've got medicines for weight loss and that sort of thing. But it also has become a very popular illicit drug. There's a lot of stimulants that are misused, abused, that are, still have similar effects that fit into the stimulant category, but they're a little more dangerous, a little more addictive. Listen, they're all highly addictive. I mentioned caffeine as being innocuous, but ask somebody who just quit coffee after drinking coffee for a while. Actually, don't ask them. Give them a few days of not talking to them, and then go back and ask them. And I'm sure their experience would be similar to mine. The one time I tried to quit coffee, the headache just didn't go away. So Definitely very addictive. Even the safest of the stimulants are addictive. So let's talk about where cocaine came from. So cocaine comes from the coca plant. Technically, cocaine is cocaine hydrochloride, so it's ingredients from the coca plant with a chemical process involved. The coca plant is native to Western South America, typically in the higher elevations, and it's been used by the indigenous people of South America for over 1,000 years. Now, typically, they chew the coca leaf in order to combat altitude sickness, because as a stimulant, it increases blood flow, increases your metabolism, increases the amount of oxygen getting to your body. It's good for altitude sickness. Not a lot of people realize how bad altitude sickness can be. If you've ever watched a Denver Broncos home game, you'll see the entire visiting team on the bench, inhaling oxygen. There's just not enough air up there. If they could chew coca leaves and get away with it, they absolutely would, because that would be, something that has been used for 1,000 years to combat altitude sickness. Modern day, we use oxygen tanks, which seem to work pretty well. So, excuse me. Cocaine is typically the powder that we see in the upper picture there, and it's most commonly insufflated, which is a fancy word for snorted. And you can see in the image I decided to use, we'll touch on a little bit later with pop culture, but you can see what he used as the person in the photo, staged, I'm sure, used as a straw to inhale the cocaine was a $100 bill. That goes back to the whole 80s when it was the rich man's drug and it was everywhere. Also, cocaine can be smoked in the form of crack cocaine or in freebase. And it's basically two processes that slightly change the chemical makeup of the cocaine to make it more easily burnable, basically, or vaporizable. And then it can also be injected intravenously. The most common, like I said, is snorted. Most of the time when we see it in pop culture, and again, we'll get there also, most of the time we see it in pop culture, we see it being snorted. Not only, but that's where typically we see the most of it. So early U.S. history. So the U.S. has a weird relationship with cocaine, especially in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. Just look at that ad. I mean, I could have spent an hour just doing, ads for cocaine from that time period. They had it in toothache drops. They had it in shampoo. They had it in wine, something called Vin Mariani. And yes, it really was an ingredient from when Coca-Cola was founded in 1886 until they decided to get rid of it in 1903. So again, like I said, I could have done an hour just showing you these awesome old-timey advertisements. And maybe that's not the one you want to go down when you decide to choose a one-on-one training. But just to give you an idea of what I could have done with this had I wanted to take 2 hours of your day. So be thankful that I didn't, but ask me if you'd like me to. That's also just fine. So a little bit about the legality of it. So cocaine was first synthesized by a German chemist in 1855, my apologies. And it was legal in the US until 1914. So we had a good 30 years there. I have to do my math later, but we had a good amount of time there where it was perfectly legal in the US. So much so that in the Sears catalog throughout the 1890s, for $1.50, you could buy a syringe, and that came with a small amount of cocaine. They were basically, the big drug dealer was Sears catalog, and people would buy the syringe, inject the cocaine, and get that euphoric effect that they wanted to. That became a little too much, and finally by 1914, with the Harrison Narcotic Tax Act, they basically outlawed both opiates and coca products. Basically, at the time, the impetus was there was too much crime being perpetrated from people who were using these substances, either because they felt it made them crazy, or people needed to steal to have money to pay for their addiction. I mean, $1.50 at Sears doesn't sound like much, but in 1890s money, I can see why that could happen. Now, coca leaves and coca tea, are still legal in the United States. You can order them online. You can get coca tea from eBay or what have you. So that still remains legal. And then keep in mind, the coca leaves that are in the coca tea aren't quite the potency that we know to be when we talk about cocaine. It is still pretty potent. It's a very stronger than a regular cup of tea. Maybe you get a little numbness and tingling in your mouth from it. And as such, it still does help a little bit with altitude sickness should you find yourself in that position. But the cocaine itself is currently a DEA Schedule II drug. So a little more on the DEA drug schedule. Basically, the DEA will rate drugs from the most dangerous to the least dangerous. So we have things on Schedule 5, for example, the lowest of the schedule, things like Valium 5 milligrams or less. So it still has some potential for abuse, some potential for harm and addiction, but generally, when taken as prescribed, it's not quite as dangerous as the ones that are further up the schedule. When we get all the way to Schedule 1 drug, we are talking about substances that have no accepted medical use, have a high, have a high potential for abuse, high potential for harm, high potential for addiction, and those are typically the drugs that, the worst, basically the worst of the worst. So cocaine being a Schedule 2 drug means it really meets all those other criteria, but it does have legitimate medical uses. Some of the things that we see cocaine still being used for is mainly nasal surgery. We see it particularly in septoplasty, rhinoplasty, and endoscopic sinus surgery. Yeah, had to jot that one down. I would have gotten it wrong. So again, there are still limited but legitimate medical uses for cocaine. So that keeps it in Schedule 2. And next we'll talk about trending. The reason I felt that this was a timely time, lack of a better sentence, it's a timely time to talk about cocaine is because its use is very much on the rise. So the information I'm showing you here comes from my trends webinars. If you've ever been to those, it's basically data from the DEA's National Drug Threat Assessment. The data takes a long time to compile, so it does drag a couple of years. So what I make sure to do is I look up news articles, read other media postings or law enforcement postings and that sort of thing, just to make sure these trends I'm showing you are still correct and still worth speaking about. And in this case, they are. So the chart on the left, we see Colombian coca cultivation and pure cocaine production. So that's the coca leaves that they're producing and the actual cocaine they're producing. So if we look to its lowest point in 2012, that was at 263. And then if we look at 2019, which is the latest set of data, that's at 936. It's about 4 times increase from what it was. And if we look on the right chart, this is the total number of deaths from drug poisoning, drug overdoses from cocaine, or including cocaine. Its low point was 2012 at a little over 4,400. And if we look in 2018, it's over 14,000. That's a 5-fold increase. So cocaine use is definitely on the rise. We see, again, production on the rise. We see purity on the rise. We see prices continuing to drop down, not as drastically as they did over the course of the 90s and the early 2000s, but the pricing is still trending downward, use still trending upward. I can't find any really good statistical data that tells us why this price is going down, whether it's because there's more demand or whether the low price is causing the demand. I couldn't figure out the exact cause and effect on that. But as I do more digging and as I come up with new information, I'm always sure to make sure I share it with you all. And then this is another one that we could spend hours on. I decided to throw in a little bit about pop culture just because I said, in the late 1800s, the U.S. had a strange relationship with cocaine. In the early 80s, 90s, and really continuing today, we still have a really strange relationship with cocaine. Nothing shows it more than pop culture. So we got this infamous screenshot here from Scarface, the 1983 movie. I'd be surprised, everyone my age, of course, but I'd be surprised even if the 25-year-olds that are watching this don't recognize, Pacino in that famous pose with a mound of cocaine on his desk. And things like Eric Clapton's hit song "Cocaine," that was on regular rotation on the radio, probably still is on some of the classic rock stations. And then we have other things to think about, like more cautionary tales. We've got John Belushi, for example, died of a cocaine and heroin overdose in 1982. And then the one that always really sticks out to me is the story of a young man named Len Bias. And again, everyone my age knows this story, but Len Bias was a University of Maryland graduate, just graduating. Basketball player, had just been drafted to the Boston Celtics. Kid's got his entire bright future. 22-year-old kid. He goes out to celebrate his being drafted, and he dies of a cocaine overdose. So for every, sing along like Eric Clapton's "Cocaine," there's a cautionary tale. There's a lot of pop culture or events in our history, and again, maybe only people my age, but there's a lot of cocaine stories that stick out. And for me, it's a solid reminder that nothing I want to get involved in. And then lastly, and most importantly to us, would be detection. So basically, first of all, the cocaine panel is probably the one panel I don't think I've ever seen a false positive. In my 20 some odd years doing this, I've never seen a false positive, never seen a false negative on a cocaine panel. I don't know, if it's the cocaine itself that does that, the way your body reacts to it, but it just happens to have been one that I've never even heard a complaint about. So that's good. You've got the tools. You've got the tools to fight this. So your detection in urine is about 2 to 3 days. Oral fluids, detection in oral fluids, 24 hours or up to 24 hours. And then it's also standard window with sweat patch, which is 2 to 3 days before the patch goes on to 2 to 3 days before the patch comes off. And then also with hair testing, it's their standard window, which is up to 90 days in the hair. Let's see. It looks like we've got a couple of questions popping up, so let me get to it. All right. Can someone become high on the coca leaves and the tea if they take enough? If so, would the effects be also with the coke panel detect coca leaves? Yes, absolutely. So again, the coca leaves, if you made like a cup of tea, it's probably not much more potent feeling than a cup of good tea or mate for all my South American friends. So taking it would just be a mild stimulation like you might get from a strong cup of coffee or a strong cup of tea. In higher doses, you'll actually get the euphoric effect, the numbing effect, pretty much everything else that we're associated with a cocaine high. So yes, you absolutely could. But by the same token, you could do the same thing with caffeine. Both coca and caffeine, they're poisons. I mean, you take everything in enough, and it's a poison. You can die from water poisoning. So yeah, everything in moderation. But the coca tea tends to have about the same addictive properties, stimulating properties as caffeine. And yes, absolutely would be detected on the cocaine panel, which is the most important part. Thank you, Ronald. And then one other from Ronald is fentanyl being laced inside cocaine. Yes, absolutely. Now, I talked about this, and I talk about it whenever I talk about fentanyl or whenever we talk about drug trends. There is definitely some contamination in cocaine, contamination by fentanyl. Now, if I was somebody who was who wanted a cocaine high, again, a stimulant, wanted an upper, and somebody mixed it with fentanyl, which was a downer, I would probably not go back to that same person and buy that cocaine again. Fentanyl's very addictive, but not much more so than cocaine. So the best thing I've been able to find, and I can't really prove it, and once I get proof of this, you guys will be the first to hear about it. My thought is that most of the the fentanyl contamination in every drug, and we're seeing it in methamphetamine, cocaine, it's just people who aren't careful in their work, their work areas. So in other words, on Mondays we do the fentanyl batch, and they're bagging up the fentanyl, and Tuesday we do the cocaine, and they start bagging it up without necessarily cleaning their work surfaces. So, of course, think on a much larger scale, because a lot of these cartels, it's not like a little guy at a desk like me. It's a team working at a huge lab table. So it is possible that it is just cross-contamination from poor work surfaces. I can't see why you would add something as expensive as fentanyl as a filler for cocaine when you could add something that is cheaper than fentanyl. So that requires more research. But yes, we're absolutely seeing fentanyl contamination in cocaine. Whether it's laced remains to be seen. All right, next is Chris Montgomery. Your blog last month talked about testing fentanyl. Yay, people read my blog. Yes, absolutely, Chris. The nice thing about the instant drug tests that are testing the parent compound, in this case, cocaine, is testing cocaine itself, is that if you find a powder or a surface residue, you can use the standard cocaine panel to detect if that powder or that residue is actually cocaine. All it requires is a separate buffer solution that you can order through your consultant. Not that expensive in the big picture, so definitely worth it. Let's see, is there any particular region where it's more popular, like New York City? Good point, Ira. I mean, especially if you think back to the heyday of cocaine, which I consider the 80s, every movie that showed Wall Street brokers at that time showed them doing cocaine. I mean, it just seemed like, yes, Wall Street was like the heart of it, Studio 54. Obviously, big cities that tend to have a lot higher concentrations of wealthy individuals, especially going back to the time frame that you're thinking of, Ira, then yeah, it was probably when it was rich man's drug, it was probably more concentrated in the big cities. But the way the price has fallen between the Studio 54 days and now, it's more of a universal drug. We're seeing it really pretty much everywhere. It's not that much more expensive than, it's actually probably cheaper than heroin or fentanyl. So it's definitely gained popularity also because of the reduction in cost. Becky's asking, can thyroid medications make a positive cocaine test? I have not seen anything yet that will cause a false positive on a cocaine panel. But Becky, if you have something specific that you have heard about, I can definitely do some more research into it. If you would just drop a comment in the comment section with the specific name, and I will definitely do some digging just to make sure it's not. Listen, a lot of times we make the statement that no, nothing will cross-react. We haven't tried all, however hundreds of thousands of different substances there are to see if they cross-react, or for them or every combination of substances. But typically we see common medications that we've all heard of, where they're on the top 100 list, and we know for sure that those don't do it. So it could be some obscure med that I have not come across in my 21 years. But again, I haven't heard of any cross-reaction on cocaine since I started. Becky, that was Becky's. Ira asking, do you charge for training, and is there podcasting? We do not charge for training, Ira. Hopefully we'll get to keep it that way. But again, it's just so important for us to want you guys to have information, education, things that are useful. Again, not everything I told you today is going to be useful in your everyday work, but you hopefully got some useful tidbits. And some of the other ones are obviously a lot more pointed and a lot more technical oriented, which absolutely are help you in your daily work. But yeah, for now, we want to do as much training as we can because we just think it's that important. As far as podcasting, at this time, no current plans, but keep in mind that this is available as a recording on our website, usually a couple of days after we're done recording it. Whether you could call that a podcast or not, I'm not sure. It's typically linked through YouTube, so anyone searching absolutely could find it. Then Cindy asks, can you touch on the cocaines and how other people that are not doing cocaine can test positive on a drug test? I'm not 100% certain I understand the question. The cocaines as in, I'm not sure. How other people that are not doing cocaine can be testing on a drug test. They shouldn't be. The nice thing about, an instant drug test won't tell you this. One nice thing is when you send specimen to a lab, for example, they're going to break it down and tell you, here's the parent cocaine. This could have been dropped in the urine. But below this is the benzoglycoginin. I'll never pronounce that right. But basically the primary metabolite of cocaine. So if the lab detects the metabolite of cocaine, then that cocaine went through the person's system. It didn't just accidentally show up in their urine. Now, if somebody is in a room, like the room that I mentioned before, where they're packing up the cocaine from the table, and there's powder in the air, if it's airborne, then yes, they'll absolutely could inhale enough to trigger a positive on a test. I would still say that enough for them to have enough metabolite in their urine for it to be detected on an instant test, I would venture to say that they definitely felt the effects of the cocaine. It wasn't like they touched it and now they have cocaine in their system. It would have to be enough that they actually got it in their bloodstream, felt the effects of the cocaine, and then metabolized it enough to void enough of that metabolite in order to pop a positive result. I hope that actually answered the question. Perfect. Thanks, Cindy. And then lastly, Helen asks, Ira, Ira, good advice for Ira. They live in a rural in Michigan. Oh, yeah, you guys. Helen, we've talked about this, I think. Yeah, I know there's a lot of cocaine where she is. So, especially, Midwest, unfortunately, there's just a lot of drug abuse going on out there. Ohio is like seeing the worst fentanyl right now. It's bad out there. So, keep your eyes open, and let's help each other. Thank you very much for adding that, Helen. I appreciate it. All right, that looks like all the questions, so I'm going to let you all go. I really appreciate you all coming out. It means a great deal to me. It means a great deal to us as a company. And I hope you guys continue to show up, bring friends. We're very happy to have you. Until next time, keep on testing.